Welcome to the Your Leadership Legacy podcast. My name is Paulus-Krause, and I'm so excited to bring you this next podcast dedicated to you high performers out there who want to reinvent yourself, reinvent your business, maybe your career, all of it. This podcast is all about being dedicated to transformation and being the best possible leader of yourself and others that you can be in order to create a legacy that lives on. Welcome to Your Leadership Legacy. My name is Tina Paulus-Krause. I am the founder and CEO of True You Teams. And here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to Your Leadership Legacy. My name is Tina Paulus-Krause, and today we have Kendall Wallace on the show. Hey Kendall.
Hi Tina, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a little bit of two peas in the pod in what we do, which I love, and we're going to be able to get into some really great conversations. But before we do that, I would love for you to just introduce yourself to people listening and let everyone know a little bit about who Kendall is.
Sure. Well, it's nice to meet all y'all. I basically help teams, leadership, help to align their teams through breakthrough experiences that are either virtual or in person, that are all around creating alignment for the teams, connection, especially in distributed workforces when they really don't know each other and it's very transactional. And those they need to cultivate the traits of high performing teams, which is actually caring about one another and caring about their mission. So I facilitate these experiences really to help build that trust while also making it a fun experience and something that moves the needle on the relationships that people have with one another 2 weeks down the road.
Yeah. Ooh. There's a lot there. There's so many questions just in what you said right there, but you mentioned the word breakthrough. So talk about what you mean by going through breakthrough and what that does for a team.
Really a transformational experience. So if you kind of think of the opposite of, going to dinner and drinks and being like leaving with like, well, that was fun, or going to an escape room, which is what people can, sometimes companies will invest in as their team building activities. And granted, it's better than nothing, but
Right.
it's, I don't want people to leave with that experience of, yeah, what was the point of that? Or that was, that was all right. And still not move the needle on the relationships that where the needle needs to be moved because the two people that needed to sit next to each other chose not to sit next to each other. And
Right. So we did not solve the root problem.
we did not solve the root problem whatsoever. What was
Yeah.
the ROI on that experience? Meh. It was a meh ROI. And that's not what people want. So when I say breakthrough, I mean transformational experience, actually changing the relationships of how people work with one another. And so that means cultivating empathy, really cultivating listening skills, which I know that may sound juvenile, but at the same time, if even as adults, unless we are facilitated into an experience where we're actually doing these things, sometimes we don't have time for them. And so they don't happen until we take a break from the normal day-to-day grind and actually carve out an hour to find out why someone is on this team and what their goals are 5 years from now and how we can support one another to get there. For example.
Yeah, what's so crazy. I mean, I talk about theory versus embodiment a lot. And so I want to talk about that with you because, so many of the company that I work for, so many of the companies that I work with today, we've got this like belief that's been around since the who knows when that, leadership development and theory is, where we go. And you've mentioned transformation a couple of times. So I want you to talk about the difference between theory and embodiment, right? Like the development versus the embodiment. How does transformation really get to the root of how people are embodying the behaviors that are actually going to work for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way I think about embodiment is, and I'm not sure if this answers your question around theory versus embodiment, but the way I think about embodiment nonetheless is when you look at the leader and the leader doesn't have to explain something because they're embodying it, right? They're embodying empathy. They're embodying good listening skills. They're embodying, maybe they got challenged, but instead they're breathing. They're
Yeah.
breathing through the experience so they're not flying off the handle. And so these efforts that we want from reports specifically around, being better collaborators, people mimic what they see, so really the embodiment aspect of making sure that leadership embodies that which they seek is just so vital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you really get that across on teams?
Yeah. So through a series of different exercises, such as requests and offers, is one that I mentioned before.
Hmm.
So using the language, may I, will you? And so I'll facilitate this exercise that I think is really helpful because, again, it just helps people kind of get in their bodies of their gut reaction. So often we can talk ourselves out of kind of this innate knowing. So
Hmm.
imagine, the team wants to go in a certain direction and you have that gut feeling that's having you pull back, right? And so I really, in an exercise, try to help people cultivate that because at the end of the day, that's that intuition is actually really helpful. So in the may I, that's where people are offering support. May I help you on this project? May I take on this part of the project,
Hmm.
right? And then seeing how that lands with the other person who's being asked the question, literally in their body. Do they feel a no or do they feel a yes? And honoring that.
Yeah.
And similarly, the when they're asking for a request, like, will you do this, right?
Hmm.
Will you take on, another, yeah, like this part of the project, whatever. And then really seeing, are they honoring their yes or no? Like, how does that feel embodied?
Yeah.
And then being able to actually bring language to that.
Yeah. The words are important, right? Words matter. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the times when we're in that moment of conflict, that moment of miscommunication, that in the moment kind of a thing, we don't always know the right question to ask. We don't always know, the right way to handle something. So how do you support teams, like coming into a team that's in conflict, that's not necessarily getting along? How do you support teams to really start embodying, not having that reaction and just being able to work together?
Yeah. So a couple different ways. Number one, I'm an EFT practitioner. So where applicable and where people are open to it, I'll even actually guide an EFT tap. So for your listeners who don't know, that stands for emotional freedom technique, using tapping uh, to basically psychologically accept anything that is really challenging and then reprogram uh, accordingly. And so actually just even tapping, I'll have people tap on their chest, right? And
Hmm.
say, you know, like about the layoffs actually was something I did recently. So like
Hmm.
even though these layoffs just happened and I feel like I'm fighting for my job. Like, it's okay. So it's like really bringing down those cortisol levels because that's
Yeah.
ultimately the big challenge. As much as I always thought that team building and experiences with teams was really about, from a neuroscience perspective, really elevating the serotonin and dopamine. But it's actually really enabling people to be better when those cortisol levels are building up and when they're in that fight or flight. So being able to recognize that, I help the teams recognize that in the moment. Like I'll say, when there's tension in the room, everybody take a deep breath,
Yeah.
right? And just these moments of like providing groundedness that we often forget when we're like
Totally.
wound up and in the moment. So I
Hmm.
think that's really important. EFT tap, like providing these skill sets to basically release the tension, bring people back down. And then there's this framework also called the BART framework. Are you familiar with that? Yeah.
I've heard of it. Yeah. I don't use it
Okay.
necessarily, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So having people, I think that's a real that was a real eye-opening experience for me, actually, to recognize. So BART framework the B stands for boundaries, authority, role, and task. So it's like, for example, are we aligned on the task? What does everybody think the task is, i.e. the goal of the group? And
Mhm.
you'll get 7 different answers.
Yeah.
Right? So actually helping people navigate through that. And I think that
Mhm.
there's another part that was a huge blind spot for me when I was in an intact team, and that was role and authority.
Mhm.
Because as a yeah, I'll just go ahead and claim this. As a strong female with like innate leadership skills,
Please claim
I
that. Please always claim that.
yeah, I'm gonna self-authorize in that way.
Yeah.
I was not in a leadership position on a particular product team that had a lot of conflict. That was really challenging. It's actually how I got into this work now. Was it was just so abysmal, and I do not want people to have experiences like I did.
Right.
And it was really a question of role. See, this other person was the quarterback of the team, and I didn't quite trust the leadership direction she was taking things in. And so I would challenge her authority. And what an absolute, I mean, there's so many things that could have gone differently in
Mm-hmm.
that scenario, but what an absolute aha moment that could have been created had we not had our offsite as like, go to an escape room and do yada yada. No debrief, by the way. So that's the other thing. If you're going to have fun, just debrief it and how it relates to work. Oh, so and so
Right.
took a leadership and, a role in this particular exercise. Do they do that normally in work? Like these are kind of conversations that can help ground and again move the ball forward on relationships. And so I think that that framework is really helpful, and I see that being helpful for teams to just have these aha moments of understanding when they're what role they're taking on, sometimes the combator, sometimes the peacemaker, not necessarily their position, and then
Yeah.
also when they're kind of grappling for that authority.
Mhm.
It's just, yeah, it's incredible. I
Yeah.
was going to ask you, how does what I explained so far relate to your team agreements?
Yeah, it's like it's so interesting because where I was going to go with you next is let's talk about leadership because in my team agreements, one of the very first questions that I'll ask a team when I go in is how many of you are leaders?
Mm,
9 times out of 10, only the leaders with a title will raise their hand,
mhm.
right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask that again. How many of you are leaders in your life? And then, people start to get it and stuff like that because I think that there's this programming in the workplace that says if I don't have a leader title, then I'm not a leader. And so, that's not true. We're all leaders. We all lead our life in many different areas. And so when you were talking, what I heard you saying is, when we have those fun team building things,
Mhm, mhm.
we're not only are we not tying them back to the work, but we're not tying them back to the root issues of what's not working on the team.
Yeah. That's the big thing is just
You
like,
know?
let's move the needle on the stuff that we go home and complain to our spouses and friends about.
Yeah,
Like, otherwise,
exactly.
why bother? Like,
Hmm.
people are, it's so funny. Some teams are just like, oh, our employee satisfaction is just in the, eh, like just terrible or whatever. And yet they're not having those types of conversations or like, oh yeah, we had a ton of layoffs and like did we ever address the elephant in the room? Did we ever address that like people are scared for their jobs and have a real conversation about like, hey, how can we support one another since we're all feeling this
Yeah.
fear and anxiety?
Why do you think that's not happening? Why do you think those conversations don't happen?
Because people are scared to have them. I think specifically the managers that whose manager scores are going down the drain are don't have the I think there's two things at play, my opinion, and I'd love to hear yours, but is that number one, I don't think they have the finesse or like know how to have that conversation should it go wrong. And that's kind of the beauty of bringing in a third party facilitator is you do have a
Totally.
scapegoat. Like, okay, cool. Like she's not part of our team.
Right. And that's
And
trained to have those conversations, right? It's
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. I mean
I agree.
that's obviously it. Is when you bring in a third party facilitator who's trained, you're the likelihood of that going south and not being resolved, right, is just very, very slim.
Right.
That I think, and then the other part is just, I think there's just, okay, the focus is on output. We got to make sure that output is so much for our team so that our team's not cut, the next layoff round. And so it's just, it's so, the focus is not on taking a break to have a conversation like that.
Right. Right. It's on the I mean, the self-care piece, I think people poo-poo the self-care piece. And the reason why, in my opinion, I'd love to hear your opinion. The reason why the self-care piece is so important is because if I show up on my team and I'm not taking care of myself, that's when the miscommunication has happened, and it's when things are breaking down, it's when things are falling apart. And, by just allowing your team to actually take care of themselves, like listening to when they might need a couple hours off or whatever that looks like, it makes a big difference on the team when the focus is it's okay to have self-care. And
Yeah.
I think that that's why we end up in those rooms having those team building activities, is because
Yeah.
we think that fun is the answer, and it's not fun. Fun is not the answer.
Mm-mm.
The answer is clarity, right? Like the
Mm.
answer is alignment. The
Mhm.
answer is priority. The answer is communication. All those EQ kind of things that we're not super good at yet.
Yeah.
And so that's what I see what you're doing, what I'm doing when we bring these kinds of things into a team. It's really allowing for that self-awareness and that self-regulation. And I mean, imagine a world if we were of teams, if we're all self-regulated and
Yeah.
self-aware. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd go much different.
For me, it's almost like this self-awareness piece that then creates connection when shared. So I'll give
Yeah.
you an example. So that teammate, when I was back at a tech company and really didn't get along with a teammate, uh, and was consequently actually fired for not being a good teammate, which is what thrust me into, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I need to learn everything about team dynamics and how this happens, and so that I can
Yeah.
help other people not lose their livelihood for,
Right.
for miscommunications.
Yeah.
Um, and what was fascinating about that is I think there's innate systems challenges, right? So the the sad truth is that, I had been passed up for promotion, right? And so like that's the underlying thing that I never shared with that teammate. But here's the thing. So passed up for promotion, people tend to detach when that happens, right?
Hmm.
And or lean in on like, oh my gosh, this is my, pathway to, okay, what do I need to do to get promoted next?
Right.
And for me, I was told, okay, you got to, in my particular position as a UX researcher, you got to influence the product direction. Now, here I was partnered with the product manager or quarterback of the team that basically was like, I don't care what your research says, it's my way or the highway. This is like my vision for the product strategy is the way we're going. And so actually, no matter what I did, when my research kept showing that her vision was not working, this just came off as me being an unsupportive teammate to her, of course. Now,
Hmm.
I didn't realize at the time. I was told, you know, friend of a friend type of situation. She also had gotten passed up for promotion. So here you got two
You never
people,
know, right? You just
you
never
got
know.
two people literally like fighting for their livelihoods and like throwing each other under the bus to do it.
Hmm.
And it really does mimic, I will say, some of this layoff kind of morale sentiment that we're in, where I'm hearing a lot of, particularly in tech, people just not being good collaborators. It's like this every man out for themselves. And I can
Hmm.
empathize with how you get there, you know?
Totally.
So,
Absolutely. Look at the
so
business landscape in the last 5 years. I mean, it's
yeah.
like it's
So
changed a lot.
it's having those EQ conversations though around what is actually at play. Like, hey, people are in fight or flight. Like, how can we choose not to engage in this potentially for more often than not? Maybe sometimes it'll seep in, but how can we choose to actually operate as a team and like having a real conversation
Yeah.
around the
With
table
everybody
with
on
the
the team.
community? Yes. Like looking around in people's eyes, that's a
Mhm.
real uh that's something that will shift employee engagement, let me tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why this is coming up, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I,
Yeah.
I got back from one of my leadership development programs, and we had done this exercise where we were just simply looking in each other's eyes, right? Connection. We were talking about connection. Like if you really want to connect with somebody, just look in their eyes. Like we forget to look in people's eyes. And so I got home and I said to I walk in the door and I'm like, hey, come here, to my husband. And we gave each other a hug. And I like just was like, just a second, let me hold your hand. And we stood there and I'm like, I just want to look in your eyes. And he was like, what are you doing? He was super uncomfortable, thought it was, I was like, I realized that we never actually just look in each other's eyes, right? And it was this huge connection moment for us. But
Yeah.
like we just connect with people.
Yeah.
It's just connection. And when we connect and we connect from our heart, we can get to the root of anything and solve anything. But we spend all this time up here on the surface in teams pretending not to know, and we're in the chaos and all that kind of stuff. So it's why I love the work that you and I both do, because it really, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but no matter what, when I go in, no matter if that team's high performing or if they're in conflict, at the end of it, just seeing people like take a breath and ground and go, oh, I don't have to be like that. Oh, we don't have to do it like that. It's and seeing that relief, and just creating a different way to do team is super supportive to people. So thank you for all the work that you do, because it really matters.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I couldn't agree more for likewise for the work you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. It starts individually, right? Like if there's a team,
Mhm.
yes, it starts with the leader. I get that. But imagine teams where every single person on that team was showing up as the leader. I am a leader. I am in my power. I am in kindness. I am, and when we show up with those ways of behavior, it makes a big difference on the team.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also, yes, I agree. And at the same time, it's something I've thought of recently in the past month as I was like, it's like we have such an attachment to leadership in this culture too. Like there's no, what's funny is you got to have some followers too. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like I was at this training with people at the University of San Diego for this master's degree in leadership. And I was like, you know, everybody wants to be a leader. There's not like a master's degree in followership, you know?
I think I really believe that being a masterful leader is understanding when to lead and when to follow.
Yeah.
Like I believe
Yeah.
that follow piece is being a good leader. Like
Yeah.
knowing when, okay, somebody's got it right now. I get to trust and let that person take it. I mean, that's part of that mastery of
Yeah.
leadership.
Yeah. I would agree. I would
For
agree.
sure, for sure. So the name of the podcast is Your Leadership Legacy. So I always ask people, what leadership legacy, Kendall, are you leaving? What are you intentional on?
My leadership legacy is truly to embody that which you seek your others to mimic, is really to be the leader that people can emulate.
Mhm.
And it's also truly to help resolve conflict in a way such that teams are aligned so that nobody ever has to lose their job for being a bad teammate.
Yeah, we're going home and taking it home. I mean, I can't even,
Yeah.
I think about the the numbers of nights and weeks and months that I took all of the heavy home and then took it out on my family and my kids and, all the toxic stuff. And so again, I stand for a world where we get to have both. We get to have awesome
Hmm.
careers and we get to have really great home lives as well. And it is
Hmm.
possible. I believe that.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Where can people find you?
So people can find me on Instagram. My name is Kendall Wallace 123, or on LinkedIn. And it's LinkedIn Kendall Wallace. So yeah, just would love to, if this episode resonated with you and you want to reach out, by all means, DM me. I actually have a playbook for offsites that I put together that actually has a lot of different exercises that people
Nice.
might be interested to have, so that when they're planning their next offsite, and I just give it away for free because I want teams to build better trust. I want them to really connect. So by all means, DM me your leadership legacy plus playbook, and I'll be happy to send that to you.
Awesome. Amazing. Amazing. Well, I think you are amazing for sure. You're powerful.
Likewise. What a treat.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been. It's been fun. I always love talking to people who do the same kind of thing. It's super fun. But thank you for your stand in the world, for your stand for teams, for leadership, for just being a better person in general. It matters. It really matters. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
You bet. All right, everyone. That ends this episode of Your Leadership Legacy. We'll see you next time. Bye.
My name is Tina Paulus-Krause, and I thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Check out our programs and events at trueyouteams.com. And until next time, make it an amazing day.